Thank you very much, Gerrit. I'll put my stopwatch on. I'll try and be good. Hopefully the microphone's working. Yeah, you can hear me. Brilliant. So yes, I'm Joe Powell, Chief Executive of All Wales People First. We're a national umbrella body of self-advocacy organisations for people with learning disabilities across Wales. That's the spiel. And I'm going to talk to you about the proposed British Bill of Rights, which is intended to replace what we now call the Human Rights Act, and my concerns primarily about the impact on this for people with learning disabilities. The scary, well, everybody really, but obviously in this context, learning disabilities. And the scary thing is most people don't even know it's happening or what actually is going to happen. So, I'm going to start and give a very, very brief history of human rights in the United Kingdom. So after World War II, obviously there were a lot of atrocities and what have you. We had a thing called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. The idea of that obviously was to safeguard human rights and come to a common understanding and a common standard of the way we should treat people. And in 1950, the European Convention of Human Rights was formed, which basically was a European version that incorporated the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So anybody connected to Europe followed what we know as the European Convention of Human Rights, and that included the United Kingdom. The whole point of the Human Rights Act of 1998 was to bring European Convention of Human Rights into UK law, appeal human rights cases in the United Kingdom. So in the past, if you had a human rights abuse situation, you had to go to Europe to have that case heard. Not everybody could afford to go to Europe, so largely people didn't get their rights heard. So the whole point of the Human Rights Act 1998 was to basically copy and paste ECHR human rights law into British law so that your case could be heard and dealt with here in the United Kingdom, especially for the most vulnerable of people. And the reason they did that is because taking cases to court was expensive, again, especially for people who were vulnerable. In the UK, we had 173 cases in 21 years before the Human Rights Act. So whether your human rights were breached or not, it was very difficult to have anything heard and anything dealt with. And there was a popular demand for that to change. Another point of the Human Rights Act of 1998 was to make sure that Acts of Parliament are compatible with human rights. So any new Act of Parliament, any legislation, any bill that they try to put through Parliament has to be checked against the Human Rights Act to make sure it's complied before it can be passed. If it doesn't pass, then a judge can issue what they call a declaration of incompatibility, which basically says this does not follow human rights. Now, this in its own right won't stop an act. A government could still put it through, but politically it would be very damaging if any government ignored it. So, in all intents and purposes, it would put an end to any law that doesn't follow human rights. Now, what's interesting about the Human Rights Act of 1998 is it built onto laws that were already there. So we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, the European Convention of Human Rights, which copied and pasted the 1948 Declaration into European law. But Britain didn't have its own specific Human Rights Act. So in 1998, we have the Human Rights Act, which is our own British version, which incorporates all of that. Now we're coming on to the British Bill of Rights. Now, we need to understand why or what it is intended and what it's intended to do. Now remember, the British Bill of Rights will still incorporate the European Convention on Human Rights. That will still happen, but what will change is a different interpretation of human rights. And this is where this gets tasty and interesting. Now, before I go on to that, some of you might say, but we're not in Europe, so what is the problem? So just to remind you that this is not the European Union. We're out of the European Union. This is the Council of Europe, the Human Rights Act, or the European Convention of Human Rights comes from the Council of Europe, of which we're still connected. But the British Bill of Human Rights, I'm going to go into this now before I come into how things are interpreted. But one of the reasons why the UK government want a British Bill of Human Rights is because a politician, Dominic Raab, wrote a famous book called The Assault on Liberty, What Went Wrong with Rights. Obviously, when he became the Justice Minister, he wanted to then implement this as law. And what they were arguing is that the Human Rights Act gives European law too much power over United Kingdom law. The Human Rights Act gives the courts too much power over government. Rights inflations. So there have been absurd cases where human rights have maybe stopped situations of justice happening because the human rights of a perpetrator has been deemed more important than the victims of the crime they've committed. So you hear it in terrorist cases, for instance. I won't go into this for now. That's the argument they're making. But the British Bill of Human Rights, what will change about it is it will give governments more power, not the judiciary. So the whole point of having a Human Rights Act was that an independent judiciary would hold governments to account over how well it maintained its human rights. What we're worried about is that if the government has the power here in the United Kingdom, it will ultimately decide whether something has breached human rights or not the judiciary. And if you're not happy with the government's decision, then you can take it to Europe. Except you can't take it to Europe because not many people can afford to go to Europe in the first place. Hence the reason for the Human Rights Act of 1998. It will also, any new laws will not be checked against human rights law. So any new bill that's passed will not be cross-referenced to make sure it checks against human rights. And it will make it much harder to appeal human rights decisions. It will take away public bodies' duty to not have to safeguard our human rights, and it will reduce our right to private and family life. This is all reported by Liberty and the British Institute of Human Rights. Past behaviour may mean you're entitled to less human rights. So anybody who's behaved badly, for want of a better word, or has a criminal record in the past, will have reduced human rights. And it will make it much harder to hold the UK government to account in the courts if it breaches human rights. Now, what is really interesting is a thing called the Declaration of Incompatibility. That's what I mentioned before, which basically gives the judiciary or the law the power to look at a human rights legislation and say, a new legislation and say it's not compatible with human rights and withdraw it, that will go. So no judge can say it is not compatible with human rights anymore if there's a new law tried to be passed, because it won't exist. And what they will put in its place, and now this is where the interpretation bit I talked about before changes. So this is just an example, but they want to change the positive obligation part of it. So instead of the government responsible for making sure something negative doesn't happen, the spin will be government should not cause something negative to happen. So in the case, for instance, of, this is what really worries me when you hear about people with disabilities dying in hospitals unnecessarily, for instance. My big anxiety with this is the government didn't physically cause it, then it's not breached any rights and the public authorities aren't responsible. That's the fear we have. So if the government don't personally cause it, then they've not breached rights. So as an example, Article 2, the right to life. Government are positively obliged to keep you alive. Government can't interfere in your life and kill you. Which I hope that makes sense. This different spin makes a very, very different outcome. Freedom of expression. One of the big problems with this bill, and one of the problems politically, and this is why opposition parties, as far as we're aware, are going to oppose this, but they're very frightened to oppose it, is because there's a massive woke culture at the moment, where political correctness and wokeness has got to the point where a lot of people have become fed up of it. And when people are making right-wing arguments in terms of immigration, foreigners coming in and taking our jobs, blah, 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 when people stand up against that and say, no, that's not fair, that's not right, politically it can be damaging. So people are very frightened to stand up and speak out against the British Bill of Rights in case it comes across that they are left-wing. Social justice has almost become a dirty word because it's seen as woke and pandering to people who are taking advantage. And this is the problem opposition parties have got, considering there's a general election in 2 years' time. But what is interesting about the British Bill of Rights is that it's the first democratic government in history to repeal its own human rights, ever. So, for instance, the Human Rights Act of 1998, we had the Magna Carta, 1215, King John, Runnymede, just in case anybody's interested. We had the 1689 Bill of Rights, which built onto the Magna Carta, both still on the statute books, and then the Human Rights Act of 1998, which built onto that. So all of our law has been built on and is relevant. The British Bill of Rights will rip it all off the statute books and will only have a British Bill of Rights, which will be what the British Institute of Human Rights and Liberty call a rights removal bill. It's going to remove the rights for everybody. I've already covered the opposition party's position. So why are we concerned as always People First? An independent inquiry commissioned by the UK government concluded there was no need to change the current Human Rights Act, no need at all. In fact, the evidence collected was about 70% of it was very damning about the impact on vulnerable people, people with disabilities and other protected characteristics, incredibly damning. And yet despite that, the government are still trying to pass it anyway, despite being advised it didn't need to be changed. People with learning disabilities are more likely to suffer human rights abuses than most people. There are a lot of people out there in everyday life who don't necessarily have to challenge for their human rights, so aren't necessarily aware when they've been breached. Benefit cuts. You remember a while back when we first started looking at PIP and the benefit cuts. A lot of our members, people with learning disabilities, lost PIP at the first count and had to appeal. And a lot of the reason that was kind of overturned or pushed was because of human rights and European courts and what have you getting involved. There's a cost of living crisis. It's going to make people incredibly vulnerable. You might have heard of that. People with learning disabilities can't afford to take to European courts, as I said before. And even if they do, there's going to be a backlog of cases in European courts, which means it'll take longer to get an issue sorted because you've got the whole of Europe applying to get cases heard there. And remember, human rights are there to make sure governments do the right thing. And what we're really worried about is that the new British Bill of Rights is going to be very much geared to the political machinations of the current government. The whole point of human rights is it shouldn't matter who's in government. We have an agreed standard of what good rights is. People with learning disabilities should not have to panic and be scared when a new government comes in, whether they're going to get their benefits or not, whether they can afford to eat. It shouldn't matter which colour's in Parliament. That should be sacrosanct and protected, as should the NHS and everything like that. So what have we been doing? We've worked with the British Institute of Human Rights and others to extend the consultation deadline. So people with learning disabilities, for instance, there was no accessible information. So we worked to get an accessible consultation put out there. And actually what happened was, interestingly, we got a 12-day extension. So everybody else out there had 12 weeks to respond. People with learning disabilities had 12 days. And we worked with the British Institute of Human Rights and others to get the consultation produced in Easy Read, which was part of that work. We obviously spoke to our members across Wales to see how it would affect them, shared information with members in groups. We've replied to millions of consultations. We've written to all Welsh MPs in Parliament asking them not to pass this Act. We've wrote to all party leaders in the UK Parliament, responded to the call of evidence. What now? So we had a first reading on the 22nd of June 2022. There was meant to be a second reading on the 12th of September, but it was paused when Liz Truss came into power. And the reason we think it was paused was because the detail of it wasn't written particularly well enough. But when Liz Truss came into government, Dominic Raab was not the Justice Secretary anymore, so we had an opportunity that maybe this would be withdrawn. Guess what happened a couple of months later, not even a couple of months later? New Prime Minister. Yes. Dominic Raab is back in charge, and this is his bill, this is his thing. So we're expecting sometime soon for there to be a second reading of the Bill of Rights to go through Westminster. And we think it's very likely, if not certain, it will be passed. And if it is passed, we've then got to rely on the House of Lords to stop it. So only the Justice Minister can withdraw the bill, Dominic Raab, his own bill, or the bill can expire if it is not picked up in this Parliament. So basically, something has to be done quite soon. If it is picked up, goes to a second reading, as I said before, the House of Lords. And then, of course, it depends on whoever the next United Kingdom government is. And let's face it, there's going to be a couple of options in 2025. We're going to have a Conservative government returned, or a Conservative coalition, or there's going to be a Labour Party and a Labour coalition. If Labour get into power, then the chances are it will be dropped, but they won't make a song and dance about it. For the same reason I said before about the woke and the social justice stuff, it will just fall off. But ultimately, we don't know. We're just seeing how this plays bit by bit. So what you can do is write to your MP, campaign, and before I do the thank you for listening bit, I want you to think about Jack Kavanagh's story before that Dawn told. Now, this is during a situation where Jack, in principle, has human rights. In actuality, probably doesn't. But in principle, he does. And best case scenario, I think they will protect him ultimately, and he will get a fair outcome eventually. Whatever damage that does to Jack in the meantime is another story. Can you imagine cases like that if we have a watered-down Human Rights Act? Can you imagine just how damning that is going to be, where there'll be no calls for appeal? Things like protesting in public, for instance, and things like that are going to be much harder. It's going to be much harder for people to have their own voices in terms of self-advocacy, the work we do. But for those of you who heard what Dawn was saying about Jack's story before, how many of you here think that that's all right? Put your hand up if you think it's okay what happens to Jack. Put your hand up if you think it's not okay what happened to Jack. Everybody who's put their hand up is wrong. It's perfectly acceptable what happened to Jack. And do you know why it's acceptable? Because we do it. Because we are doing it. And as long as we allow it to happen, we are making a statement that this is all right. And this is why human rights is so important. This is why it's so important we sell this narrative. This is not a left-wing, do-gooding, woke thing. This is essential for the safety of vulnerable people everywhere. Now, Learning Disability Wales conference today is called Where Do We Go From Here? I'm going to answer that for you right now. Save you all the time. You should have put me on first. I'd have answered this for you. Where do we go from here? We have a very unfair system that's failing a lot of people. If we're very lucky, it'll stay that way. If we're not lucky, it's going to get worse. That's very cynical, isn't it? Now you might think, why is that? Why are you so cynical? Because the problem is, it's the system that is the issue. The system and the bureaucracy are stopping good people from achieving and implementing the things they want to achieve and implement. A lot of people are so used to doing things the way they've done things, they're measuring things in the same way. So think of a bucket. There's a hole in our bucket, dear conference. There's a hole in our bucket, a hole. Think of the system as a bucket. Think of a bucket with a hole in it. That's the system. The money you put into that is water, and it leaks out and it doesn't work. This is the problem. We need a new bucket. We need a new system. Because I know the minister before mentioned and talked about the new learning disability strategy and what have you. And I'm going to go on the record here and put my neck on the line, even though we're part of all of this. It can't work. It can't work because the system won't allow it to work. That's the point. The bureaucratical system we have is a system which will mean people like Jack Kavanagh, for instance, in a preventative world, is in a situation where it's going to cost more to keep institutionalising him than it would for Jack just to get the support he needs in the first place to stop being put in these places. But the system can't see that, and it can't do that, and the barriers are there. So this is why going forward into the future, all of us, we really need to keep an eye out for the Human Rights Act. and the British Bill of Rights, the Human Rights Act, and be very mindful of a future coming. The one positive I'd say about the times we're living in is that we're in a critical juncture now. Society, economically and socially, can't afford to go on the way we've been going on for this long. We could be living in pioneering times where if we get this right, we could change things with people with learning disabilities for the future. But we are going to have to be bold and brave and stand up and speak out. I think that's me 5 minutes under, which I'm sure will help claw back the time. Just thank you for listening, and please look at the British Institute of Human Rights website and read the information from yourself. The Pembrokeshire People First, one of our People First groups, have done an easy read guide on it. Please just be aware of it and what the implications could be for the work you do. Thank you very much.